There comes a moment in certain people's lives when something shifts so fundamentally that everyone around them feels it, and it terrifies them. Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist who revolutionized our understanding of the human psyche, observed something remarkable in his patients. Those who had spent their entire lives absorbing the emotions, pain, and chaos of others would eventually reach a breaking point he called the necessary death of the self. But here's what disturbed Jung most. This wasn't a breakdown. It was the opposite. It was the moment when the empath, the healer, the eternal giver, suddenly goes cold. And what Jung discovered about this transformation will challenge everything you think you know about empathy, sacrifice, and what it truly means to be strong. By the end of this video, you'll understand why the coldest empath is actually the most awakened one, and why this might be the most important transformation a person can undergo. These weren't people who occasionally helped others or showed kindness when convenient. Jung noticed that his patients who experienced this dramatic shift had spent decades functioning as what he called emotional shock absorbers for everyone around them. They were the ones their families called at 3 a.m., the ones who counseled friends through the same crisis for the 5th time, the ones who could sense when someone was upset from across the room and immediately abandoned their own needs to fix it. Picture this. A woman sits at dinner with her family, and before she even takes a bite, she's already scanned everyone's emotional state, noticed her mother's passive-aggressive tone, felt her sister's anxiety, absorbed her father's unspoken disappointment. Without thinking, she shifts into mediator mode, smoothing over tensions she didn't create, managing emotions that aren't hers, ensuring everyone else is comfortable while her own food goes cold. Or consider the man who works a full day, comes home exhausted, and within minutes is listening to his partner's problems, his neighbor's drama, his friend's crisis, all while his own stress, his own pain, his own dreams sit quietly in the corner, waiting for a turn that never comes. These empaths had become so skilled at reading others that they'd forgotten how to read themselves. They could tell you what everyone else needed, but couldn't name their own desires. They developed an almost supernatural ability to sense emotional shifts in others while becoming completely numb to their own breaking point approaching. Jung observed that these individuals had created an unconscious contract with the world. I will manage your emotions if you let me feel valuable. I will carry your pain if you give me purpose. I will sacrifice myself if you acknowledge my existence. But here's what they couldn't see yet. They were keeping meticulous records. Every dismissal, every time their pain was minimized, every moment they showed up and no one reciprocated, every crisis they solved that was never appreciated, all of it was being documented in the deepest parts of their psyche. But here's what Jung found most remarkable. These empaths didn't consciously realize they were being exploited. They'd been conditioned, often from childhood, to believe that their value came from their usefulness to others. Many grew up in chaotic homes where they became the emotional regulator, the peacekeeper, the one who made themselves small so others could be big. This pattern became their identity. Jung identified this as a dangerous form of what he called identification with the persona. They had confused their coping mechanism with their authentic self. The empath believed they were their empathy, that without it, they would be nothing. So they continued giving, continued absorbing, continued setting themselves on fire to keep others warm. Society reinforced this beautifully. They were called so caring, such a good person, the glue that holds everyone together. These compliments became chains, because if you're the glue, you can never let go. If you're the caretaker, you can never need care. If you're the strong one, you can never break. What Jung discovered in his analytical work was that beneath this selfless exterior, a shadow was growing. The empath's unconscious mind was collecting evidence. It was noting that when they were sick, people were annoyed rather than concerned. It was recording that their accomplishments were met with indifference, while others' minor achievements received celebration. It was documenting that their friends only called when they needed something, that their family members took and took, but recoiled when asked to give. Here's the disturbing truth Jung uncovered. Most empaths knew they were being used. Deep down, they could feel it. But they had become so addicted to being needed, so terrified of abandonment, so convinced of their unworthiness, that they accepted the crumbs. They told themselves, "At least they're in my life. At least I matter to someone, even if it's only when they need something." The empath became complicit in their own exploitation, and this, Jung argued, was the real tragedy. Not that others took advantage, but that the empath had learned to see their suffering as the price of admission to relationships. But then something happens. Jung called it the catalyzing betrayal, a specific moment when the carefully constructed illusion shatters completely. Sometimes it's devastatingly simple. The empath has a genuine crisis, perhaps the worst moment of their life, and when they finally reach out for the support they've given 1,000 times, silence, or worse, annoyance. "I can't deal with this right now," says the friend they've counseled through countless dramas. "You're being dramatic," says the family member, whose actual dramas they've managed for years. Or it's the realization that arrives like a lightning strike. They've just solved everyone's problems at a gathering, ensured everyone felt heard and valued, and as they sit there exhausted, they suddenly see it. Not one person has asked them a single meaningful question. They're surrounded by people yet utterly alone. Sometimes it's a small thing that represents everything. They're going through something painful, and someone they've supported through identical circumstances says, "Well, at least you don't have it as bad as I did." In that moment, something in the empath doesn't break. It crystallizes. They don't cry or rage or make dramatic pronouncements. Instead, something far more terrifying happens. They become perfectly, utterly calm. The fog clears. They see with brutal clarity exactly what every relationship in their life actually is, and they make a decision that reverberates through their entire existence. If this message resonates with you, like this video and comment, "I see clearly now." What Jung documented in his patients during this phase was extraordinary. These empaths didn't announce their transformation. They didn't send messages or have confrontations or post declarations. They simply stopped. They stopped responding to the 3 a.m. crisis calls from the friend who never answered their daytime hellos. They let the text from the family member who only reached out when they needed something sit on read. They said no to the favor without explanation, justification, or guilt. They stopped managing their mother's emotions, stopped mediating their siblings' conflicts, stopped being the free therapist for colleagues. At work, they stopped volunteering for every extra project, stopped covering for incompetent co-workers, stopped staying late to fix others' mistakes. They did their job excellently, but the extras, the emotional labor, the invisible work that kept everything running, stopped. In friendships, they stopped being available on demand. They stopped making all the effort, stopped being the one who always reached out, always planned, always showed up. They became mysteriously busy when convenient friendships called, but unavailable when those same people needed something. This wasn't announced with fanfare. There were no dramatic speeches. The empath simply began honoring their own boundaries with the same dedication they'd once shown to everyone else's needs. And the reaction from others was immediate and revealing. People panicked. The family members who'd ignored them suddenly noticed their absence and demanded they stop being selfish. The friends who'd taken them for granted called them changed and cold. The partners who'd relied on their emotional labor accused them of not caring anymore. The manipulation tactics came flooding in: guilt trips, love bombing, playing the victim, accusations of cruelty. But here's what Jung found most fascinating. None of it worked anymore. The empath had integrated their shadow. They'd combined their gift for understanding emotions with the hard-won wisdom that not everyone deserves access to that gift. They'd merged their capacity for compassion with the fierce boundary that compassion must include the self first. They could see the manipulation clearly now because they understood it. They'd been living it. They could feel the guilt others tried to impose, but they no longer accepted it as valid. They'd learned the difference between being kind and being available for exploitation. Jung described this transformed empath as having achieved what he called individuation through boundary. They had become whole by learning to discriminate. They developed an almost supernatural ability to sense authentic versus manipulative behavior. The same sensitivity that once made them vulnerable now made them untouchable. They could read an entire relationship in the first conversation. They could feel when someone was genuine or performing. They knew within minutes whether someone valued them or their services. And they had zero hesitation in walking away from anything that felt like the old patterns. What made them truly powerful was their restraint. They had the receipts. Every text, every moment, every betrayal meticulously stored. They could expose every person who'd used them. They could retaliate, could make others feel the pain they'd carried. But they didn't. Not because they were still people-pleasing, but because they genuinely let go. Revenge required caring, and they'd stopped caring about people who'd never cared about them. Their energy became a filter. Toxic people found them suddenly intimidating and drifted away without being pushed. Users sensed they couldn't get the old supply and moved on to easier targets. Drama seekers felt uncomfortable around their newfound peace and left naturally. Meanwhile, something beautiful happened. Authentic people appeared. Real friends who gave as much as they received. Partners who valued their presence, not just their service. Family members capable of reciprocal relationships. These people had always existed, but the empath had been too busy serving takers to notice the givers. The transformed empath rebuilt everything. New careers built on self-worth rather than self-sacrifice. New relationships based on mutual respect. New homes that felt like sanctuaries instead of service stations. New boundaries that felt like freedom instead of selfishness. They chose consciously rather than compulsively. They gave from overflow, not from depletion. They loved with wisdom, not with the desperate hope of finally being loved back. Jung believed this transformation represented something profound about human development. The empath going cold wasn't about becoming heartless. It was about becoming conscious. It was the death of the false self that existed only to serve others, and the birth of the integrated self that could serve from wholeness. This isn't cruelty, it's clarity. This isn't selfishness, it's self-respect. This isn't coldness, it's the healthy temperature of a person who's stopped setting themselves on fire. This isn't closing the heart, it's opening it to the one person it had always excluded, themselves. Jung saw this as the highest form of empathic development. The empath who learns to direct their gifts consciously rather than compulsively, who understands that true compassion includes fierce protection of one's own energy, who knows that you cannot pour from an empty cup, and who has finally filled their own cup first. So when the empath goes cold, what's really happening? Not a loss of feeling, but a gain of discernment. Not a closing down, but an opening up to self-love, to worthy relationships, to authentic purpose. Not an ending, but the most important beginning of their life. You didn't lose your warmth. You learned to stop giving it to those who would never appreciate it. You didn't become cold. You discovered what healthy boundaries feel like after a lifetime of enmeshment. You didn't stop caring. You finally started caring about the one person who needed it most. Welcome to your awakening. You've earned this transformation, and everyone who truly loves you will celebrate it, while everyone who was using you will call it your downfall. Their reaction tells you everything you need to know. Not cold, conscious, not cruel, liberated, not broken, finally, beautifully, completely whole.